Fathers are often the custodians of culture and tradition all across the world. They shoulder the noble responsibility of preserving age-old customs and values to be instilled in their children for transfer to future generations yet unborn. Tunde Awoyiga is a first-generation Canadian immigrant and proud father of two incredible children, one of who is the 2023 Halifax Youth Poet Laureate. As we celebrate Father's Day this year, I'm honored to have this remarkable gentleman in the studio. You are most welcome to Community Update today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Let's start out by having you share a bit of your immigration journey to Canada, your motivations and your experiences.
Thank you for the question. I started off as a student.
Okay.
And I immigrated to Canada as a student who came to study at Dalhousie University. I came to Dal to study Masters of Development Economics.
Okay.
And I was accompanied by my lovely wife, Afalake. And we came in 2003. That would be about 21 years or so now.
Wow.
And that's kind of how the journey started. We never had kids then, and the kids kind of came along after we arrived there.
So fatherhood came along as part of the journey. And since we're celebrating Father's Day, fatherhood suggests that they're children. So tell us a bit about your lovely jewels.
So I have two kids, a boy and a girl.
Right.
And I would say that they are doing well, as much as any parents would want. And the journey working with them has been all hands-on. Mm-hmm. And that's something that my wife and I have both been doing, say, in the last 20 years to get them to where they are now. It's not like our work is done. We're still doing it, but at least we kind of laid that foundation over the last 20 years.
So you have 2 good decades under your belt.
We do.
You have 1 poet laureate, so definitely there's something you're doing right.
Thank you for that. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so what would you say is the inspiration behind your method or mode of fathering?
Well, if I cast my mind back, I would say my inspiration has been actually from my dad. I find it a bit challenging to talk about my own role as a dad in terms of the things I've done really well or the things that I've done perfectly in terms of being a father. My dad was somebody that I think I looked up to. God rest his soul. He would always be engaged in everything that we do. While we're going to elementary school, even our secondary school, which is high school.
Yeah.
And then during the university days, he's always there, very supportive, and he would drop us off in school most times and even pick us up at school. When there were no phones, we didn't have cell phones or mobile phones. There was no way he would have known, except he has timed it that these guys would be done school at a certain time.
Right.
And looking back into his relationship with my mom, there were lots of things that I learned in terms of how you run a house. I think my dad was kind of light years ahead in terms of being an advocate for women and empowering women. He would
progressive.
He was just progressive. He would always support my mom in doing things. He would do things around the house. He would do chores around the house. And those were things that I was picking up gradually. Because like they say, it takes 2 to tango.
Right.
Both my mom and dad were doing this all together. And we as kids, we weren't sat down to be told about how to do things right or how to be a dad or how to be a mom. But we were kind of learning from our parents.
By observation.
By observation. And one interesting thing is, which looking back now, I look at that and I think, well, that seems to resonate with me because there was no day my dad was late in coming home.
Wow.
He was always, I can't remember a day that he came home later than 5.
Wow.
Like you will have some dads be out late. Mm-hmm. That wasn't my dad. He would always be home on time. Plus he had his own business that he was doing on the side. He was a graphic artist. And he was always kind of dedicated to his family. He would always go to work in the morning and come back home like around 5. I can't remember a day that he was away or out late.
That is phenomenal to hear, because you're describing a time when, I mean, out of Africa,
Right.
my understanding of, you know, a lot of the family systems was such
Right.
that there was a father figure that was
Absolutely.
like a lion
Yeah.
in the family.
Right.
He just reigned. He
Yeah,
had a throne
right.
that he sat upon and reigned, and everything revolved
Revolves
around him.
No, that wasn't
Wow.
my kind of home. In a way, it revolved around my mom and about my dad really supporting my mom and caring for my mom and doing the things that she wanted. And my dad was an orphan.
Oh, wow.
So you would probably wonder where he sort of got all of those ideas from in terms of how he runs a home or how he
Right.
runs his family. But he did it somehow. And those were the things that I learned. And there wasn't anything that I could remember that like major conflicts that they had. We never had anyone come into our homes to settle rifts or issues with them. They would always find a way to resolve things. All through their life, they both ate from the same plate.
Wow.
They ate from the same plate. They slept on the same bed. They were almost following themselves around
You know,
in everything that they do.
As you share, I'm wondering if, you know, the answer, you know, to why things turned out the way they are isn't somewhere in your musing. Because if he was an orphan, it probably meant that he wasn't playing to a particular script
Absolutely.
that he had seen from a
That's
father
right.
or mother. So he was able to objectively design
His own.
And that's probably what you saw there,
Right.
because what you've described, a hands-on chore performing father in that generation, you know, hands-on with the kids.
Absolutely. Yes, he would always do things with us. If he has to bathe the kids, he would
Wow.
always do that. If he has to do that, if he has to wash clothes,
Right.
he would. And those were things that I was seeing while growing up. And there are instances where I go out and I kind of see some men really chuckle about the fact that a man is supporting his wife.
Right.
That wasn't what I grew up with.
Right.
And in starting my own family as well, those were the things that I try to emulate, try to
So
replicate.
you've modeled your home after this exact same structure.
After the exact same structure, I always support my wife, support my children. I'm always ready to listen to see if there are things that I need to address, and the commitment and the sacrifice
Right.
that it requires. Because I think what my dad was doing back then was putting us first before his own needs.
Wow.
He was putting us first before his own needs because it was a huge sacrifice. We didn't have much. There were
Right.
days that we will go without. Right. There were days that we will not know when the next lunch will come on.
Wow.
There were days that we won't know if we're going to really have good dinner. There were days that we had gari and peanuts for
Wow.
lunch, right? So it wasn't like we had much, but it ensured that we got the most we can within his own means. I went to a private school,
Right. Wow.
but going to that private elementary school was really hard on the family, but that was a sacrifice that he was ready to make.
Indeed. It would
It
have
was a
been.
sacrifice that he was ready to make, and I think that was kind of the footing that I stand on today. I don't know if I would have been here in Canada if not for all of that foundation that was built around my education and around the fact that my dad was also strongly committed to education and how that transitioned into how my dad and mom supported us through high school and
Right.
through my university program.
So fatherhood as a life of sacrifice. So
It
what
is.
does that look like for you in your home today? Maybe your career, have you had to maybe pivot
Absolutely.
to
Absolutely.
tell us all about that.
Absolutely. I think for me, there were instances where I would have to leave work a bit earlier
Right.
just so I can pick up kids
Yeah.
and take them to their next activity, or even walk with them at home. Like most times, my routine for the last maybe 10 years, when the kids were still kind of growing up, was like from around 4 o'clock to about 6. That's kind of extra lessons for the kids.
Right.
That's what I do. So
Okay.
my wife would.
So
I would
the
tutor
kid
them.
went to
I would tutor them
Okay.
math.
yourself.
Yes.
Wow.
My wife would tutor English. So that's kind of how we did it all along. And in a lot of ways, I think that made a huge difference.
Because you were their dad, you were their coach, you were their
coach.
teacher also. So you were part of the learning process with them.
Absolutely, we were doing it all together. We were kind of growing up together as well. If in terms of the physical activities or the extracurricular activities they do, I'm always involved as well. If I have to practice with them, I practice with them. If I have to do things with them, I do it with them. So I was sort of just emulating some of the things that I also saw growing up. And I think that helped my son. I didn't really hands off until he was in high school.
Okay.
That was when he was able to at least now maybe do things, but do his math and other studies by himself, and maybe reach out to tutors and teachers. Because I think in the formative years when they are in school, the school system, the way it's set up now, doesn't give them 100% all they need at that age when they're still in elementary school.
Okay.
By the time they get to high school, the expectations are so huge that if that foundation hasn't been strong enough,
right,
they may struggle.
There's a huge jump.
It's a huge jump from that expectations in elementary school, middle school, and then high school. So if that foundation isn't strong, then it's going to be problems, right?
Right.
And studies have shown that kids of African descent may not persist in post-secondary education, and it's not unconnected to all of those challenges. And the same thing for my daughter, who you talked about. It's also kind of the same plan. We go through the same process together. The interesting thing is raising a boy or a son is different from raising a girl.
I've always been curious about that. Do you wear different hats for fathering a daughter versus actively fathering a son?
I absolutely do. And I have to kind of commend my wife, Afolaga, for this. I've learned a lot from her in terms of how I have to kind of work with my daughter as well, because the personalities are different, right, from my son. And the way girls interact or the social interaction they have is slightly different from that of boys, right? And my daughter has different ideas in terms of what life is and the way to dress and the things to wear and all of that. Those wearing things that I had to think about with my son, right? It was just him putting on his pants and his top and he's off to school.
Right.
Well, with my daughter, there has to be some discussions in terms of what she's going to be wearing today and what look she's looking at and all those things.
Wow.
Right. So that makes it a huge difference, I would say, in terms of how I have to kind of address fathering a son and a daughter. It's totally different.
Does one of them open up to you more than the other, or?
I wouldn't say
or they're both
so.
equally as open?
I think it's both. I would say the relationship in terms of how we discuss is pretty much open for both. But I think my daughter might have a bit more leeway, I would say, unlike my son did.
Okay.
But it's kind of different personalities, I would say.
Wow.
For each of them.
That's interesting. You've experienced fatherhood back home in your country where you grew up.
Right.
And then there's fatherhood here in Canada, where you are actually fathering. One, you experienced, you were being fathered, and the other, you're fathering. What is your advice for any new immigrant parents, particularly fathers, based on your 2-decade-long journey in the business of fatherhood?
Thank you. I would really say the fundamental thing is to understand that the system is different here. The culture is different. The roles that fathers might play back in our various countries is not the role that we're expected to play here. Back in our various countries, we might play a sort of a hands-off role and leave everything to mom to do, or leave everything to other members of the family to do. Here, it's different.
There's probably hired help
hands-on.
Back in
Absolutely.
there's probably hired help too.
Absolutely. And here it has to be hands-on. You have to be engaged. You have to be involved. You have to change the diapers. If you have young children or babies, you have to change diapers. You have to carry strollers. You have to carry car seats and all that. And you even have to cook if you have to.
I hear you.
So you have to be able to cook or support your wife and do things. So it's an environment where you have to be partners. And you have to be partners in the absolute sense of it. You have to be partners all the way if you want to succeed in this country. And because that positive partnership is what's going to trickle down into the household in terms of how you raise your kids as well. There is a lot of things that we as fathers have to think about in terms of how we move forward in this culture if we want to succeed with our families.
So what I'm hearing a lot about not just the sacrifice, but the intentionality. Because you have one child who is an award winner, you have another one who is in his academics on full scholarship. You've been through the ranks of elementary school and middle school and high school, and we're looking at tertiary education. And it sounds like you have a well-oiled machine because there was intentionality in building, from the onset. So I think that this is phenomenal, and it's inspiring for fathers on today's Father's Day.
Absolutely. And I wouldn't want to really undermine the role of faith, right? And we couldn't have come this far without God in all of the things we've done so far. And irrespective of our background and privileges, I think faith is important too, and I think it helps to ground the family unit
and instill the identity.
It does, yeah. It does.
Is there anything, just in closing out, is there anything in particular that you have done to try to preserve the culture that you grew up with around your children now, who have never been to the land of your birth?
That's right. And that's the one thing that I believe most people who know our family will be aware of, right? Both of our kids speak Yoruba, which is our language from southern part of Nigeria, southwestern part of Nigeria. And these kids have been in Canada for close to 20 years.
Wow.
And they've never been to Nigeria, but they speak Yoruba and they also write Yoruba.
Not just speak.
They do write it. I was joking with someone at some point that I would always receive texts from my son in Yoruba.
Wow.
So we text ourselves in Yoruba. We don't text in English, right?
So you have your coded African language with which you can communicate and pass all kinds of codes here in the West without anybody.
We do. And the surprising thing too is there was not a single day that we sat them down to say, Bi Baba or Fi Fila or something, or teach them, right? This was just something that we continued to speak in our own.
And they picked it up. Amazing.
We don't speak English at all.
Okay.
Right. We speak Yoruba, which is that language from southwest part of Nigeria. And to us, that is something that my wife and I decided that we have to do to preserve our culture. And we believe that it has all of the values and the teachings in it, right?
Right.
And along with the food, the music, and everything. Those are things that we held really dear, and we felt we had to preserve that. And we have been able to do a bit in terms of having these children speak this language, and they can engage in conversations in Yoruba, which is a language that from a part of Nigeria where they've never even been to.
Interesting.
Right.
So it is doable.
It is doable. And that's what I tell families that I see around. You cannot say, oh, my kids hear the language, they just cannot speak it. The completeness of the language is being able to speak and being able to understand it. And
you added even the extra toppings of the cake. They can write it.
They do text it. Yeah,
that is amazing.
Yeah.
Well, for all of your efforts on the home front as well as within the community, from Community Updates, we would like to thank you and say Happy Father's Day to you.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me.
Thank you for spending time with us today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
On this Father's Day episode, you've been listening to Tunde Awoyiga, a first-generation immigrant in Canada, sharing from experience that a hands-on dad on the home front is an intervention for the family unit any day. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and get notified when we post new content. Until next time, I am Modele Akintokun, wishing every father out there a fabulous Father's Day celebration.